Friends, take a deep breath and stay with me for the next few minutes, because what I'm about to share hits close to home for millions of seniors and retirees who've been quietly doing the right thing their whole lives, people who worked, paid into the system, and now depend on Social Security, SSI, SSDI, and fixed incomes that just don't stretch like they used to. And I want you to picture this for a second. It's early morning, the coffee's just gone cold, you're checking your bank balance or opening the mail, and you're wondering how you're going to cover groceries, prescriptions, and that utility bill that somehow jumped again, and then suddenly your phone lights up or the TV Chiron flashes those words, breaking news, and you hear that the Supreme Court has just issued a decision that could clear the path for a new $2,000 stimulus check. Not a proposal, not a campaign promise, but a real legal opening that Washington insiders are scrambling to respond to right now. And if you're thinking, I've heard this before, don't get my hopes up. I understand that skepticism completely, because seniors have been burned by hype more than once. But what makes this moment different and why I'm speaking carefully but urgently today is that this development is coming from the judicial branch, not Congress, not the White House press room, and it changes the rules of the game in a way that could directly affect your household. If you're receiving Social Security retirement benefits, SSI, SSDI, survivor benefits, or even VA-linked payments, and I want to walk you through exactly what happened, why it matters, what it could mean for your wallet, and what you should and should not do right now to protect yourself, because alongside opportunity always comes confusion and unfortunately scams. And my goal here is to be the calm, steady voice in the middle of this noise, like a neighbor sitting across the table saying, here's what we know, here's what we don't know yet, and here's how you stay safe. So let's rewind just a bit to understand the context, because nothing out of Washington ever happens in a vacuum. Earlier this week, the Supreme Court released its decision in a case that most people outside legal circles had barely heard of, formally titled Harrison v. Department of the Treasury, a case that centered on the scope of executive authority under emergency fiscal statutes, specifically whether the federal government can authorize direct payments to individuals without a new line-by-line appropriation from Congress when certain economic distress thresholds are met. Now that sounds technical and boring, but buried in that legal language is something very real for you and me. Because during the pandemic, those stimulus checks that helped so many families survive were issued under a mix of congressional authorization and emergency executive powers. And ever since then, there's been a legal gray area about whether similar payments could be issued again without months of political gridlock. And in a narrow but powerful 6-3 ruling, the court essentially said that when Congress has already authorized broad relief frameworks and when specific economic indicators are triggered, the Treasury and the executive branch have more latitude than previously assumed to issue direct aid. And the key phrase that set Washington on fire last night was the court's acknowledgement that direct economic impact payments may fall within the scope of existing statutory authority under defined emergency conditions. And if you're wondering why that sentence matters, it's because several lawmakers and administration officials have been quietly arguing that the cost of living crisis facing seniors right now, especially those on fixed incomes, could qualify under those defined conditions, especially when you factor in medical inflation, housing costs, and energy prices. And almost immediately after the decision dropped, sources inside the Senate Finance Committee confirmed that staff were already dusting off contingency plans for what's being referred to internally as a targeted relief payment, with the $2,000 figure coming up again and again in briefings. Not as a random number, but because it mirrors the last round of pandemic-era relief that had the strongest measurable impact on poverty reduction among seniors. And I want to pause here and say something very important. This does not mean a $2,000 check is guaranteed tomorrow or next week or even this year, and anyone telling you that it's already approved is not being honest. But what it does mean is that a door that was previously locked shut has now been cracked open by the highest court in the land. And in Washington terms, that's huge, because it changes the conversation from "we can't" to "we might be able to." And that's why you're seeing such urgency in the headlines today, and why advocacy groups for seniors, including the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, held an emergency call within hours of the ruling to discuss next steps. Now let's talk about who this could apply to. because this is where a lot of misinformation tends to spread, early drafts and discussions. Again, these are not final, but they're informed by people who've seen the outlines suggest that any potential $2,000 stimulus-style payment would be targeted, not universal, meaning it would prioritize Social Security retirement recipients, SSI beneficiaries, SSDI recipients, and possibly low to middle-income retirees whose adjusted gross income falls below certain thresholds. Numbers like $75,000 for individuals and $150,000 for couples are being floated again, similar to prior relief rounds, with additional protections for those receiving need-based benefits like SSI so that the payment would not count as income or resources. And that's a big deal, because one of the biggest fears SSI recipients have is losing eligibility due to a one-time payment, and the language being discussed specifically references exclusion from income calculations. And if you're on Social Security retirement or SSDI, the thinking is that payments could be issued automatically using SSA and IRS data, just like before, without requiring applications, forms, or phone calls. And I can't stress this enough. If something like this does move forward, you will not be asked to pay a fee, you will not be asked to confirm your bank account over the phone, and you will not be told to click a link in a random email or text, and we'll come back to scams in a moment. But first, I want to address the emotional side of this, because I know a lot of you listening right now are probably feeling a mix of hope and exhaustion. Hope because $2,000 could genuinely make a difference. Maybe it means catching up on rent, fixing the car, or finally replacing those broken glasses, and exhaustion because you've heard politicians talk before and nothing seemed to change. And I want you to know that skepticism is healthy, but so is staying informed, because moments like this don't come around often, and when they do, they move fast. And already we're seeing reactions from both sides of the aisle. Senator Elaine Brooks of Ohio, a senior member of the Finance Committee, said late last night that the court's ruling provides a clear legal pathway to deliver targeted relief to seniors facing unprecedented cost pressures. While on the other side, Senator Mark Holloway of Texas cautioned that any new payments must be fiscally responsible, which is Washington speak for negotiations ahead. But the key takeaway is that no one is dismissing this outright. No one is saying it's impossible anymore. And that alone is a shift. And inside the administration, sources say the Treasury Department has been instructed to prepare a legal memo outlining how such payments could be structured under existing authority, including timelines, eligibility filters, and coordination with the Social Security Administration. And one detail that caught my attention is that officials are reportedly considering issuing payments as economic relief credits rather than traditional stimulus checks, which could affect how they're labeled but not how they're received by you, meaning it would still be a direct deposit or mailed check, but with specific language attached to comply with the court's guidance. And again, this is the kind of nuance that doesn't make headlines but matters behind the scenes. Now let's talk timing, because that's the question everyone asks first. When would the money come? And the honest answer is that there are several gates that have to be cleared. The Supreme Court ruling was Gate 1. And that just happened. Gate 2 is executive interpretation and action, meaning the administration would have to formally decide to use this authority. Gate 3 is political buy-in, because even if new legislation isn't strictly required, no administration wants to move forward with something this big without at least some congressional support. And Gate 4 is logistics, coordinating with SSA, IRS, and Treasury systems. And based on prior experience, if all those stars aligned, we'd be looking at a timeline measured in weeks to a few months, not years. But again, that's best case. And part of my job here is to help you prepare mentally without counting money that isn't in your account yet. And while all of this is unfolding, I want to talk directly to seniors who rely almost entirely on Social Security, because this is where the urgency really comes in. COLA increases, as you know, have not kept pace with real-world expenses, especially healthcare, Medicare Part B premiums, prescription drugs, and housing, and advocacy groups have been arguing for years that one-time relief payments are sometimes the fastest way to prevent hardship, especially during periods of inflation. And the data backs that up. After the 2021 stimulus payments, the senior poverty rate dropped to its lowest level in decades, and that's why you're hearing economists quietly support the idea of targeted relief now. Even as broader economic indicators look stable on paper, stability doesn't mean affordability when you're on a fixed income. And that reality is finally being acknowledged more openly. Now let's pivot for a moment to what you should do right now, because this is just as important as the news itself. First, make sure your information with the Social Security Administration is up to date. Your mailing address, your direct deposit details, if you've moved, changed banks, or had issues with payments in the past. Now is the time to double-check through official channels, either by logging into your My Social Security account or contacting SSA directly using the number on their official website. Second, do not respond to unsolicited calls, texts, emails, or social media messages claiming to help you claim or unlock a stimulus payment. Scammers move fast when real news breaks, and they know seniors are targeted, and I hate that. But awareness is your best defense. Third, talk to family members or trusted friends about what you're hearing, not to spread rumors, but to have a second set of eyes and ears. Sometimes just saying something out loud helps you realize whether it sounds legitimate or not. And fourth, stay informed through reliable sources, not just one headline or one video. Including this one, check multiple outlets, watch how the language evolves. Are officials saying could, may, or will? Those words matter, and I'll be here continuing to break it down as things develop. Now I want to address a question that's already popping up in comments and emails. Will this affect my taxes or my benefits? And while nothing is finalized, historically, these kinds of relief payments have not been taxable income and have not reduced Social Security benefits. And there's strong indication that if a payment does move forward, it would be structured similarly, especially for SSI recipients. But again, final details matter, and we'll know more once official guidance is released. And another question is, what if I didn't get previous stimulus checks? And that's a valid concern, because many seniors were left out or had delays, and sources say that any new relief effort would include mechanisms to catch people who were missed before, using updated SSA records. And that's one of the reasons this process takes time, because accuracy matters. Now let me zoom out for a second and speak from the heart, because beyond the legal language and the dollar amounts, this moment represents something deeper. It represents recognition. Recognition that seniors are not an afterthought, that decades of work and contribution deserve dignity, and that when costs rise faster than benefits, something has to give. And whether this particular $2,000 payment ultimately happens or not, the fact that the Supreme Court has clarified the legal landscape shifts power back toward the possibility of action. And that's not nothing. That's a lever that can be pulled. And for those of you who feel invisible sometimes, who feel like decisions are made in rooms you're not invited to, know that your voices, through advocacy, through voting, through simply staying informed, do matter, and they shape these outcomes more than you might think. And I'll leave you with this. Stay cautious but not cynical, hopeful but not reckless. And above all, stay connected. Because the worst thing in times like these is feeling alone with uncertainty, and you're not alone here. We're watching this together, step by step, and as soon as there's concrete movement, official language, confirmed eligibility or timelines, you'll hear it broken down in plain English, without hype, without fear-mongering, just facts and guidance. So keep an eye on your accounts, keep your guard up against scams, and keep a little room in your heart for the possibility that help could be on the way. Because for the first time in a while, the door isn't locked anymore. It's open just enough to see the light coming through.